I'm going to answer 10 questions that I've received about playing clarinet from those of you who watch these videos. I think these will be of interest to all clarinetists, and you'll see a list of them in the write-up below this video if you're curious about what you'll find here. My name is Michelle Anderson, and I'm the founder of Clarinet Mentors, and I'm going to just go through these in order. If you have questions that you would like answered, please put them in the comments box under this video, and they may just show up in a future Clarinet Mentors video. So question number 1 I have from Linda. It says, recently I've started having an air leak at the sides of my mouth. What causes this? Well, that's pretty common on clarinet, and sometimes it's actually a really good sign. One of the things we want to do to have a good clarinet embouchure being that word that means how we shape our lips and our mouth and such, is to bring the corners of our mouth in quite firmly, as if we're wrapping the edges in this direction around the side of the mouthpiece. What that does is it really warms up the sound, and it gives us more control when we're moving between the lower registers and the high registers. Now, those muscles, although they can move in that direction, we don't really do that for very many things in our life, so they tend to be a little bit weak. And when you first start focusing on that, they get tired really easily. It is a great habit to build into your mouth. And so most people who ask me this question are people who are very conscientious, and they're trying to do the right things, and they're working on that, and those muscles kind of give out, when you're new to it, sometimes after 10 minutes, and you will start getting air leaking out of the sides of your mouth. So just like any other muscle in our body that we're trying to develop, whether it's your abs or your arm muscles, it's through regular exercise that they strengthen, and they will strengthen, and your endurance will get better. If you find that you're adding something new to your playing, whatever it is that's making the muscles tired, a good approach for building endurance is to do shorter sessions more frequently. So I would say practice, if you get tired after 10 minutes, try and play 10 minutes 3 times a day, if you can just let them rest in between a bit. Now, sometimes we're in a band practice for 2 hours, and that's not practical, and then you'll just have air leaking. Might be a bit of a distraction, but it's really not the end of the world, especially if it's a sign that you're headed in the right direction. All right, question number 2. How long should one use a particular reed? When is it time to change, and how do you know? Well, that's a great question, because we all think about that. So with cane reeds, here's a couple guidelines for you, and really every single reed is different, but this might give you some things to think about. I find that a brand new cane reed, the first day we use it, actually gets waterlogged pretty quickly, and waterlogged's just my term for it. What you'll see is that the tip of the reed starts to look almost see-through and no longer vibrates so well. And on a brand new reed, that will happen more quickly than a reed you've played on. Again, every reed's different, but my guidelines would be about 10 to 15 minutes. So I try and play a brand new reed for a very short amount of time. On day 2, you'll start to see that sort of see-through area near the tip of the reed after about 25 minutes. On day 3, it's about 45 minutes. So with a new reed, how long we should use it in one session is watching that waterloggedness and making sure we're not playing it beyond that. You can play it when it's waterlogged, but it doesn't respond as well. It acts softer, your tone gets fuzzier, and you might just think you're not playing very well when in fact your reed just needs to dry out and be ready to use again on the next day. Now, the other thing that happens with our cane reeds and our plastic reeds or our synthetic reeds, they get a little bit softer over time as we use them. So eventually, even if your reed doesn't warp and it doesn't break, it just gets too soft to use. And again, I've had some super reeds. They just sound amazing and they seem to last for 3 months. And I've had other reeds that sound great, but after a week, they're toast. So it does vary from reed to reed. How do we know? Well, I find one of the best ways to know is to make sure that you are rotating between at least 3 or 4 reeds. In other words, today when I practice, I use reed number 1. The next time I play, reed number 2. The next time, reed number 3. And I find when I'm moving between reeds, if one of them is starting to wear out, I'll notice it because it won't sound as good as the reed I just used, and then maybe the reed I use after it sounds way better. So you need something to compare it to. If you're just playing one reed all the time and it starts to deteriorate on you, it's kind of hard to tell because you sort of get used to it. So I really encourage you to rotate through your reeds. most cane reeds are going to fade out on you, depending how much you're playing, of course, in 2 or 3 weeks. That's just my loose guideline, again, because some reeds go way longer. But I just encourage you to have a mix of older reeds and newer reeds, and you'll be able to gauge for yourself how well they're performing. Now, a synthetic reed like a Legere reed, eventually they do lose some of their zing, and again, it's just comparing them. Have a couple of reeds on the go that you move between, and you'll get a sense of when they're done. And I think a synthetic reed, for most people, is going to last for a few months. So in general, one good synthetic reed kind of lasts as long as a box of 10 cane reeds, just roughly. So hopefully that helps you give some conditions that you can sort of apply it to yourself. And how do you know if your reed's good, bad, new, old? Partly it's just through experience, but that gives you some things to try out. Question number 3. We know that we don't move or change our embouchure while playing. How about the throat? Is it okay to open or close the throat while playing? So this question already has some really interesting things in it. For myself, when I'm teaching people how to play clarinet, I generally like to teach that once you have your embouchure set and your voicing set, which is your tongue position, which for a classical clarinet sound, we want it to be quite high, which happens when you say the word he. This is what my tongue is doing inside my mouth. It's high and arched. For the most part, from our very lowest note up until the early notes in the altissimo, sort of C and D, we don't really change anything. And it's when we change stuff that we cause trouble. We all have these bad habits when we change embouchure. One of them just being when we feel like the note's harder, we kind of bite down on the reed and it causes squeaking and pinching and notes not to come out well. So it's useful to imagine that we don't change our embouchure at all for most of the notes on clarinet. The exception would be high altissimo, where there's some different things. So George is asking about the throat. Well, probably, and you know, some of my higher level students have gotten into great philosophical discussions with me about the fine details of what our throat and what our tongue is doing. There probably are some changes that occur as we're moving through the instrument, but really, for the most part, I just want to say it's useful to imagine that you're saying he to produce a very small air passage in your mouth that the air can move through really quickly, which helps us to vibrate our reed and get a great sound on clarinet, and just stay with that. If you're playing jazz music or folk music or klezmer music, then our tongue moves around quite a bit. That's what allows us to scoop the pitch and bend the pitch, and in that case, we're changing our oral cavity quite a bit. So it somewhat depends on the style of music that you're playing. Hopefully that gives you some ideas. I personally don't think much about what I do with my throat when I'm playing, and frankly, in all of the great clarinet teachers I've studied with, that just hasn't come up. So I think it's not something we focus on. We definitely focus on what our tongue does, which I'm sure affects that. And that's kind of how I prefer to frame it and think of it. So I hope that helps out, gives you something to think about. I'm going to move on to question 4. So, about high notes, how to play them softly. And in fact, I put 2 people's questions together here because another person said, how do you get better tone while playing in the high register in different dynamics like forte or piano? So these 2 questions are really related. So that's a super common question that I get from people. How do I play high notes softly and sound good? And it's something that takes a bit of training. And I think when you can play high notes softly, quite comfortably, it's a sign that you have a lot of good things going on. So I'm going to give you a quick answer, but I'm also going to refer you to some other videos in the write-up below that really get into this deeper, because this kind of involves a lot of things. But the short answer is that we need to always use really fast air when we play clarinet. We want our reed, which will vibrate open and shut, to vibrate as much as it can. When we're playing loudly, we all tend to use lots of air, and because there's so much air hitting the reed, it activates it really easily and it vibrates well. It's when we're playing softly and using less air that it actually takes more work from our blowing muscles. Because if we're just putting a little wimpy, tiny airstream at the reed, it's not enough to get it going. And in the lower register, we get a very airy and fuzzy tone, and in the high register. But often in the high register, it just won't even come out at all. It's like we try and play softly and we go from airy to fuzzy to just nothing other than just air coming through the instrument. So the trick is, I like to imagine we could see our air coming out of our mouth the same way we can see water coming out of a spray valve in a hose. And that loud is tons of water coming out, moving fastly. Soft, someone's gone over and turned down your faucet so you don't have much water, but you still want a lot of force behind the water stream. Well, you would take the spray hose and adjust it to a really small stream of water so that it still moves with some force. This is what we do with our air. It's less air, but it has to move even more quickly to still activate the reed as much as it can. And there are some blowing and breathing exercises that help us to do that. Some of them are doing long tones. It's really all about our muscles right down here around our belly button that help us to control those. So I'm going to put a reference to a great set of videos that you can watch that really helps you to play these high notes things. So air support is probably the biggest factor in playing high notes softly and training ourselves to move faster. And it's something that you can improve fairly quickly. In about 2 to 3 weeks of doing some of the blowing and breathing exercises that I recommend, you will notice a difference. And I encourage you to stick with it because it is really fun. So check the write-up underneath this video for further things. But I would say mostly it's about air. There are some embouchure things as well. We want to make sure we have a nice round embouchure and that we're not pinching in the high register. Again, when it feels hard, we clench up, and that tends to make those notes blank out sooner than we would want. That should help you. It's a big question. It's a great question. It's something we all want to do well. So try out the air support exercises I have there. And in fact, I'd be curious to hear from some of you who try them. Does it work? Are you noticing improvement? Give it at least 2 weeks and you'll probably notice some improvement. After 3 weeks, you can usually notice a significant improvement in your playing. So great questions. Thank you for those. Next question. I always find myself having to force sound out of the register middle B key, and sometimes no sound comes out or I squeak. I've tried 4 clarinets this year and all had that problem. Can you please help me? Wow, great question. So there are 2 things that come to mind here. And if it's on 4 different clarinets, unfortunately, it's probably something you're doing with your hands and fingers. And the reason I say unfortunately is because for many clarinets, when we play the B that sits right in the middle of the staff of music, in other words, our register key and all our fingers down, and you're either using this pinky key or this pinky key, it puts down, I'm going to hold my clarinet up to the camera, these 2 pads on the side of the clarinet. They're kind of our bottom pads at the same time. And I will say on most people's clarinets, those pads get out of adjustment very easily. And often, one of them is just not sealing properly when you're trying to play a B. So if you find when you're trying to play a B, there's a delay to the sound, or it sounds airy or fuzzy, or it feels hard to come out, odds are it's because that key is out of adjustment. And it can be fixed. Certainly you can take it into a good repair shop to fix it. If you're far from a repair person, sometimes you can tweak it a little bit yourself. But here's how you can test it. Usually it's kind of a visual thing. And now my keys actually are in good adjustment. So when I show you this, it won't quite be showing you that it's out of adjustment, but you can check it on your own. So what I often do is I hold my clarinet up to where I can see it. Now in this case, I'm holding it to where you can see it. And I push down the left-hand B key. See, when I'm pushing this key, it's moving these 2 pads down. So I'm going to hold it down, and then with my free hand, I just poke on those pads. And if it's not sealing all the way, I'm going to lighten the key on purpose to pretend like it's not sealing. Let's say this key wasn't sealing, so I've actually lifted the key to simulate that. Now I push on it. Oh, there's some wiggle room there. It's coming down. That might indicate that that pad was not closing all the way. And so that being the case, I definitely recommend if you have a good repair person, get them to fix it. But if not, this little saddle that sits under these 2 keys, you can hold that and just with the tiniest pressure, bend that key down just a hair, tiny, tiny bit. Try it again. If we go too far, then that pad might close, but now we've thrown off the one below it. So it's just tiny adjustment, test it, tiny adjustment, test it. In playing it, you can play your high D with no pinky and add that key and see if it speaks. I will imitate what it sounds like if the pads are leaking. If the pads are leaking, when you try and play that, you'll get a delay in the sound. So I did that by not really pressing the key down all the way, which imitates what it sounds like when your B key is leaking. There's a pause, a delay, it feels hard. It should come out very freely and easily, with no resistance there. So that's what we want. So if your B is giving you trouble, please check those mechanics before anything else. Now, if that problem is happening on 4 clarinets, as our questioner has indicated here, it's possible that all 4 are out of adjustment. At that point, though, I would start to also look at yourself and what are you doing with your hands and fingers. There are a couple things that come to mind. If you're coming from something where most of your fingers are already down and you're in the high register, like D to B, well, if the D works great, but the B doesn't, and you're pretty sure your keys are working well, then you need to see if some finger is slightly coming off the hole, because resistance or the note not coming out does indicate a leak. What I was showing you a moment ago was a mechanical leak where those pads aren't closing all the way. Well, if we have a finger that's not covering the holes all the way, that's also a leak. It's just one that we can correct more easily by moving our finger. Usually, when it's a pinky note that has a finger leak, it's usually the finger right beside that pinky. So if I tended to play B with my right hand, sometimes when I go down there, it stretches this finger off the hole a bit, and that'll cause the same leak. So look in a mirror, watch carefully, make sure if I was playing D to B, that I'm only moving my pinky and not that key. If you do it with your left hand, again, it might be that you're pulling some of these fingers off, and that's worth checking out. Now the other thing is, if we're coming to the B from a low register note, like an A to a B, well, there's all kinds of fingers moving on our left hand, and it's very easy for one of these fingers not to come down all the way, or our thumb to not come down properly and cover the register key and that hole. So again, looking in a mirror, doing it in slow motion, look at your fingers. We just want to make sure they're all closing over the holes. Very common complaint, though, that the B key is not working. So that was a great question. And hopefully that will help lots of people who have problems with their B. All right, next question on our list. I am self-taught and have difficulty with speed. I don't seem to be able to transfer the notes to fingering quickly enough. Well, great question. I probably don't know any clarinetist who doesn't have some music where we say, I just can't get my fingers to move quickly enough. And again, this is kind of a big topic, and there are many things that can help you with it. So I want to say that again, I'm going to post some links below this video that have more detail on some things that I think can really help you improve this if this is something that you want to improve. But here's what I will say. We touched on it on the last question. If our hands are not in a great position and they're tending to slap down or cause leaks, it slows us down. So one part of faster clarinet technique that most of us don't even think about is making sure that our hands are in a great position to play clarinet more easily. And again, I'll give you more details down below, but here's like the mini quick version of it. We want our fingers arched and rounded in this shape because that's how they move the most quickly. As soon as we're bending at the knuckle, it slows it down. We want our fingers to come down, and I'm turning it so you can see from this angle very lightly. This is how high I lift them. That's how they come down. I'm not slapping and moving them a lot. This excess movement and the slapping really slows us down. So you can give yourself some little warm-ups where you're looking in the mirror and watch your fingers. Make sure that they're gentle, that they're arched, that they're staying close to the keys. On our left hand, we want our hand to tilt up a little bit. And in fact, our top index finger here should rest on the A key all the time if your hand is big enough to do that. If your fingers are long enough to do that and still comfortably reach the pinky keys. If you have shorter fingers, you might need to bend your hand down a bit, so depending on your hand size. On the back, our thumb should also be lightly hitting the register key all the time so that I can hit it without having to move my fingers a lot. So short version, one of the big factors in our clarinet technique is actually how we hold our hands and how we move them. Now, besides that, the second part of it is that the part of our brain that sort of operates our movement and moves our fingers around likes to memorize finger patterns. And patterns are the key to becoming fast with technique on the clarinet. So that's why we have things like scales and arpeggios and things that we use for our warm-up. And I always recommend that part of your practice routine is taking some finger patterns and doing them until they feel unconscious, that some other part of your brain takes over, which is actually how it works. So in a really simple case, if I was very new to the clarinet, and maybe the first note I learned was open G, and then F, E, D, C, my first 5 notes, I would just practice going up and down those notes, keeping my fingers close to the keys, nice and arched, just up and down, and it's amazing how quickly we can put it into the pattern part of our brain. Might do something like this. Now you might have to start very slowly and gradually speed up, but just in going up and down, up and down, up and down, after a while, I can start thinking about what I'm going to do after I finish practicing. My conscious brain can put attention elsewhere. Ideally, my conscious brain is looking in the mirror and going, oh, are my fingers doing this? While the unconscious motor movement part of my brain is memorizing that movement. So that's going to really help us. There's also some techniques, some different ways of practicing fast finger technique that helps us learn it faster, and I'll put some references below that'll help you. But those give you some of the things we consider when we're trying to improve our clarinet technique. Great question. Lots of things we could say about that, but I think that'll give you some ideas to go with. Next question. When you find yourself playing a piece in G flat major or E flat minor, what fingering for G flat below the throat tones right beneath the break do you use, especially when the piece calls for quick successions between G flat and F? Great question. Now some of you are going to be like, I don't even know what E flat minor is. It doesn't really matter. Here is the mini version of this question. He's asking what we do between G flat and F. So F being our thumb F, nice easy note. G flat we more commonly see written in its enharmonic version, which is F sharp. F sharp and G flat are basically the same sound, same fingering, and normally it's just our first finger. I really like to use the alternate fingering for F sharp or G flat when I'm alternating it with my thumb. And that's my thumb. And then we've got these 4 side keys here that we often use for trills and such. We hit the 2 side keys. Now whenever I'm trying to hit a side key, I want to make sure that the finger that's doing it can still do its main job, which in this case is covering the top hole in our right hand. So the part of my finger that would hit those keys, if I take you close to the camera here, it really ends up being the side of my finger, right about here. And that lets me get back to that hole really easily. So I like to use that fingering. The reason is, if I just say, especially if I'm slurring, between the regular F and F sharp, although I can practice and get really good at it, you can try this yourself, playing between those 2 notes. If we're not really skilled at it, we often get an extra note slipping in between, something like this. Kind of hear that finger slippage, whereas if I'm just adding the 2 side keys, keeping my thumb down, it's very clean. Now that will feel very strange at first if it's a new fingering to you or if it's unfamiliar. So again, just like we talked about, that automatic motor muscle part of our brain, I nickname it lizard brain with my students who work with me regularly, we want to program that in. So I would go F to the F sharp or the G flat to open G and back down, just back and forth. I'd start very slowly. And I would probably do that loop for a minute or so, which might mean I'm going up and down 20 or 30 times. It doesn't take long to program that into our fingers and have it feel more familiar. And again, looking at your music, take the little spot of music where you have that fingering and just do it over and over so that you kind of get that programming in there. It's a useful fingering to use. We always want to be flexible at alternate fingerings on the instrument. Then we can choose the one we like best for any particular situation in the music, but it's good to know those alternate fingerings if you don't already. All right, the last question for today's video, and I'll definitely follow up with more, so if you have your own questions, please write them in the comments box under today's video. Is it okay to cut your own reed's tip when it's getting thinner? Well, that's a great question. And some of you might be like, cut my reed? Why would I do that? Well, as I mentioned earlier in this video, reeds do get softer as we use them. And there are people who will clip the tip, much like we cut our nails, and just cutting off the tip makes the reed act a little bit stiffer. And that can work very well. So here's how I'd qualify it. You want a really good reed trimmer to do that. And I know that there's a brand name called Cordier that's quite good. Van Doren used to make some, I'm not sure if they still do, but they had some good ones. And you should practice on old reeds that you don't really care about till you get used to making a clip that's very symmetrical and very even. And honestly, we only want to shave off a sliver. If you cut too much, usually the reed is no longer in proportion and it doesn't sound great, but it's worth experimenting with. If you can do it well and you have a good quality reed trimmer, sometimes you can add a couple weeks life to a reed, and that's really nice. If it's a reed you really like and it's just kind of wearing out, that can help it. Now, another trick you can use with a reed that's getting older and softer is simply move it higher up on the mouthpiece as it gets softer. That puts a thicker part of the reed onto the vibrating tip. If we go too high, it'll sound fuzzy and airy and be hard to play. But on most mouthpieces, we have room to move our reeds up and down a bit. And just moving it up can also help an older reed that's getting soft play a little bit better. All right, that was 10 questions from you guys in the Clarinet Mentors community, which I so appreciate. And I'm going to shoot some more videos like this, so love to hear from you. Also, you might be wondering, what is the Clarinet Mentors community? Well, if you're not a member of my Clarinet Mentors community, it's completely free to join. You just go to www.learnclarinetnow.com and you can sign up for free. And if it's not a good fit for you, you can unsign up at any time really easily. But about once a month or so, I create a newsletter with an educational video like today's, but I'll also include any things I've discovered that I think are of interest to the clarinet community. Sometimes it's a gadget, sometimes it's music, sometimes it's live performances or special events coming up. And I'd love for you to find out about those things as well. It's a great way for us to stay in touch, and there's an amazing community of people at the Clarinet Mentors community. In fact, many of these questions came out of a free live webinar that we did, a webinar being an online event where we had over 85 clarinetists from over 15 countries all online together, live interacting, and it was incredible. We had a great time. So these are things you find out about if you join the Clarinet Mentors community. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope to see you on the next Clarinet Mentors educational training.